Hi, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. It's mid-April. I always like to throw in a little chronological attachment. There are interviews and there are interviews, and this is an interview. And I want to try to pack as much of what you folks are going to be privileged to hear from TITO CRAIGE in a moment. As I just said to Tito, his life has been a wonderful life, is a wonderful life. And what he's accomplished, and I'm an old movie person, this is stuff they make movies about, the life that he leads and has led and has brought him to this point in life. And before I go any further, I have huge kudos and huge thanks, we both do, Tito and I, to Alan Hesse in Quito, Ecuador, who was the matchmaker who put this together for us. Alan, who's become a dear friend, although I've never met him in person, but we've been together a whole bunch of times working on climate change projects, where he and I together started this little climate change think tank group. But Alan, I don't know, a couple of months ago said, Calvin, you ought to meet TITO CRAIGE, because Tito and Alan met, of all places, in the Galapagos. And we'll talk about that. So just to pack this little monologue, you remember Johnny Carson, Tito, this is kind of like a Johnny Carson monologue without the humor necessarily. But Tito is a humanitarian. He does amazing work, a moral commitment type of work, working with immigrants. You can talk about that. He's been a hostage. In a hostage situation. He's been a outspoken Vietnam War protester. We're student body, talk about that. Student body, he's an explorer. He's been to the Galapagos Islands. He treks around the Himalayas, etc., etc. He's a writer. He's an award-winning filmmaker. Voices of Asylum People, Haitians Speak. I watched it twice. You all can watch. The link will be here below. He's lived in a French village when he was 12 years old. He's written an amazing story called Miracles at the Border, etc., etc., etc. So, this is one, and I can't thank enough, Tito, for your time and your passion and your energy for being here. So I'm done. And why don't you do a little bit of a quick bio, and then we will jump into some amazing aspects of your life. Also, one other quick thing which we'll talk about. You wrote this wonderful article that's coming out in July, which I read. Women Divorce, Tobacco, and Outplacements of Children: Uncovering Family Secrets in Switzerland. So that's part of your writing. I don't know if you folks can see it, but this article, which I read today, you're so diverse and so fascinating and interesting. So take it away. I'm done.
Well, thanks for those words, Calvin, and glad to be here. I think that the connection with Alan was really great, because we were on these lovely islands, but we were aware that development was going to extinguish the golden goose, possibly. And so we both got kind of started with a new page, a new chapter, and then we both managed to run into you, Calvin. But I don't know. I guess, what you prompted me to think about was about my own life and why I am the way I am, and what I would like to say to people who I could meet via this virtual network. And it occurred to me that I would want to talk about something that thrills me or that makes me happy to be alive. And I think a lot of what makes my commitment day to day thrilling and adventuresome has been working with people of different faiths and from different countries, and immigration specifically. So I was thinking, where did I get the idea that was thrilling from? And I realized that when I was quite young, I was put in a French school thinking it was just a school, but it turned out it wasn't just a school. It was in a town of Huguenots in southern France, and the Huguenots had remembered that they themselves had been all but exterminated during the religious wars, and they didn't want anybody to have to suffer like that again. So they took in Republicans from this civil war in Spain, and they thought, that's what our role is. And so I heard these stories when I was a student there in the Le Collège Sevenol, and I thought, wow, these people have a reason to live. It's not to consume per se. It's not for religion per se. It's like to help their other humans, unlike themselves, but who need a helping hand, a hand up. So then we heard about how they took in Jews from all over Europe. Probably around 3,500 were put in secret places like barns and attics by these Huguenots. And the whole story resonated so fully that when I came back to the United States, I thought, I want to be like that, even though I'm in the United States. And I want to live like that. I mean, it gives me a feeling my life has a purpose. There's a point. And I guess, not to be sort of ridiculously metaphysical, but I sort of feel like once I got that commitment sort of to speak up and act on behalf of and take risks on behalf of people who are in trouble, that I would get hints from, I don't know, up above or something. I mean, to lead me ahead. And I feel like ever since I've gotten really good leadership from some maybe moral voice in the world, some humane voice that's saying, Tito, why don't you try this? Use your skills over here. And so if I started then in France with the Huguenots, I would, if you don't mind, I'll just hook in one more thing and then I'll turn things back to you, Calvin. I mean, the most recent thing I've done, which is not all that different from what I witnessed in France, was working in northern Mexico in Reynosa. Reynosa is sort of a scary place. It's right next to Matamoros, where those 4 people were assaulted recently, 2 of whom were killed. And it's similarly dangerous because of the cartel controls a lot of those northern Mexican towns in the lower Rio Grande, where I was. But the reason I was there was to work with the enormous numbers of people who've come to the border hoping to work and live in the US and are fleeing some kind of awful situation in their homes. Back in Honduras, Haiti, Salvador, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba, for the most part. But what I found just as thrilling, when I'm now much older, of course, but just as thrilling as when I was in France, among the Huguenots and the many nations that were represented in the school, today it's not that different. There are incredibly idealistic, hardworking, powerful individuals, humans with names. Are not just a mass, and they're people. And the tiniest of these that I ran into was Leticia. And she had a terrible problem that was going to put her on dialysis. So my first thought was, do we really need to work with this sick 2-year-old? I mean, what about all the adults who are taking care of children? I mean, isn't she just a burden? Maybe better let her go. But my colleague who's organized the Casa Lulu and the medical clinic in Reynosa, she's an American citizen, but she lives there full time. She said, nope, this is who we stand for. We are going to represent Leticia. And so we did this outrageous thing. We went to the hospital in Reynosa, and she said, I want you to release Leticia to my care. And we're going to go with her parents and walk across the border and get her the care she deserves. If it's a dialysis, so be it. So the hospital was reluctant, of course, but they finally released this sweet little girl. And so somehow Lulu, my colleague, found a way to get her temporary permit to go across the border. And then a few days later, her parents called me and said, "You wouldn't believe it, Letitia's healthy.
Wow.
She's not dead." And it was so sweet. And it was due to Americans in Corpus Christi at the hospital there, where they have some kind of renal care that's excellent. They brought her to life. And so when I wrote the story that Calvin's referring to, like Miracles at the Border, I thought, what an arrogant title, Miracles at the Border. But then I thought, well, it felt like a miracle. I mean, I actually didn't think this was possible. Now, every day, Calvin, I get a text from Reynosa, and it says, "Our miracle is out of the hospital today." I'm looking at one of them here. The boy who was electrocuted, the boy who was burned. Each one of these from that group down there, she's calling a miracle. And I think it's because I said, this is not just helping people. It is bringing people to life. And this is a miraculous thing. And so I don't want to toot my horn. I'd rather say the adventure of working with people who are deep down like us, but who need a hand up, is a thrilling, meaningful thing. And I guess my work over the years has been down there, but virtual as well, where I handle applications. You can do a lot of this on the internet now. And I've done a lot of applications, and maybe 500, I'm guessing,
Wow.
are people in our country, who will be here forever, with their children. And they might be, I don't know, president one day, and their children. And I feel like I'm part of not just our generation, but I'm a legacy of those I've been working with. And my work is going to be for generations to come, long after I'm gone.
Yeah.
So that makes me feel good. And I can see faces. I mean, it's not a chaotic mob.
Right.
They're people.
Yeah.
Some of whom I won't forget. And those I have in that other movie you're talking about, those Haitians, that was 40 years ago. I remember their names, and I know where some of them are right now, living here.
Wow.
So it's a gift that keeps on giving. And my wife puts up with me doing these kind of things, and my son thinks it's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's really cool. Yeah. And we've talked about it. I have my own spiritual journey, and it's been a wonderful spiritual journey. I am who I am today, and the things that are in my heart and mind, and the things that I feel I need to do. It's just like you said. You've always sensed there's something in your life that moves you along. It's not definable per se, but I think you said, I think what you experience, what I experience in my way, is kind of a gift. It is a gift to have that direction, to have some force guiding you along, so that you can do the things you're doing. You're doing gift work, and the fact you're doing it is a gift in and of itself, that you're able to do that. And I talk every day to my spirits and thank them for the journey that I've been on, and the sense of purpose that I have. I started my journalism doing homelessness and hunger, not too far off from some of the things that you've done. And I discovered things about homelessness and hunger, and autism, and things that I never knew about, and racism. But anyway, enough with me. It's time now to go to college, Tito. And you and I share the commonality of having been in college during Vietnam. And few around, unless you've been there and understand it, can appreciate it. And I told you my stories, and you've had amazing stories. So why don't you talk about your time in college?
Well, my college, Amherst in Massachusetts, they had a course on Vietnam, and I was so ignorant. I mean, I was like didn't even know where on earth this country was and what was the problem. But after this semester, I thought, gee, this is incredible. It's like a culture with thousands of years of history and, you know, enmity with the Chinese and on and on. I thought, does our Defense Department know any of this history? And then I started reading things what the French wrote, French historians, and they have some really great historians, and a lot of these books are in English. And they said, what we're doing there is a disaster, basically, and we need to pull out. They've been there 80 years. And what they said was what we were encountering, but none of what they said was shared with the public. So once at Amherst, I guess a lot of people, not just me, many people saw the folly of it. And of course, we were scared to death. We'd be sent there, and people were avoiding the draft by staying in college and other methods. But I think it didn't seem right somehow. And speaking of morality, sometimes when you stick your neck out, you sort of think, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe I'm making a mistake. But when we stuck our necks out about Vietnam, I thought probably we're right. This is a tiny country with a proud history, and we're pounding them to death as a sort of proxy for getting back at communism. It seemed like so awful and unfair and murderous that it seemed to me that we had to stop the government of the United States. I mean, a lot of people came to this conclusion that if the war wasn't going to be stopped by them, we would stop the government. That was what we said actually on May 1st, 1971 was, you stop it or we will stop you. And we did. 2 days actually in New York City, in Washington, D.C. We blocked all the entrances to town. And that's when I got arrested one time. And then later we had an anti-nuclear thing, which was really an offshoot. And we were blocking the Pentagon. Workers couldn't go to the Pentagon that day, and we were arrested. But I guess, a few minutes ago, if you don't mind me returning for a second to that, when you stick your neck out for a purpose, and I don't care whether it's helping your grandmother is sick, it doesn't have to be about immigrants or anything, but anytime you step up, you feel the ground quaking underneath, like maybe it won't support you, and maybe you'll have no friends, and maybe nobody understands what you're doing. But the other thing that happens is that people step up and say, wow, you're doing that? So in the Vietnam thing, that happened to me later when I was a teacher in another school. A Vietnamese girl, a student, was walking down the hall, and I said, are you the Vietnamese student who's in our school? And she said, yeah. And I said, oh, I'm so fascinated by your country. And she says, oh, really? And I said, yeah, I'd love to go someday. And just as a throwaway comment. She says, call my dad. And I said, oh, okay, I will. No, she said, call him today. So I went home and called her father, who's in public health in Chapel Hill, where I live in North Carolina. And he said, I'll help you go there. Why don't you, the day you finish teaching this semester, go to Vietnam and I'll find a way for you to see everything. So sure enough, he set me up with this fabulously eclectic guy in Hanoi who took me or sent me to everywhere from Dien Bien Phu, where the French lost, to Da Nang, away, the old imperial city, and I don't know, all over the country, Mekong Delta. And then I went to Cambodia, and then I went to Laos. And then I realized I was right. This was a terrible war, and these wonderful people didn't deserve this at all. And we need to do something. So I got involved with the Agent Orange remediation people and went to visit some of those children. They're not children anymore. Most of them are in their 20s, but the children of the soldiers, mainly North Vietnamese soldiers, who have these terrible birth defects, and tried to support and massage a few hands. And they're sort of locked up like claws, a lot of the children, and some can't talk at all. And but there's so many that you can't help but realize that it really was, it's not just associated with Agent Orange. It seems quite clear it was caused by it. And it's not just them. There are soldiers in this country too whose children have suffered, and they themselves too. Anyway, I realized a lot of these kids in Vietnam, nobody knows they exist. I mean, there's a lot of kids there. They're unable to take their kids to Hanoi for treatment. They're just in a difficult situation all around. But I taught English there. I helped a few kids have these Agent Orange related problems. And I felt like I've given us a little something back. Uh, Maybe, it's just a pebble in this great sea, but it felt good because I had one other epiphany, Calvin, if you indulge me. It occurred to me that they had never knuckled under fully to the French or anybody else, the Chinese. They've always ejected the oppressor occupier. And the most recent was the United States, but then after the United States, China invaded and they threw them out. So there's this pride. I mean, somebody asked me, who are the most prideful, determined people on earth? I'd have to say, ranking pretty high would be the Vietnamese. They know they can win. And I think you see the spirit in Ukraine these days. And we
Yes,
know we're justified. Our,
yes,
our fight is a moral fight. It is a fight for our humanity and our children. And it's palpable. It's not strategic. The U.S. Defense Department, this is a strategic battle, and the tanks and this, that's not how they see it. This is our land and our history. And if we're uh, wearing no armor and flip-flops like Vietnam, we'll still win. Actually, we will win. And they did. So I felt this is, later, much later, going there several times actually. I feel it's a good thing for our people in this country to go and visit and learn. There are some good museums and there's some things you can do. Or if you're just a tourist, that's fine too. Anyway, so at Amherst, I stuck my neck out a lot. I was obnoxious and didn't go to my classes as well as like I was supposed to. And we ended up telling the faculty we were so concerned, would you consider canceling classes for some number of days so we could just all together study what is the moral imperative? What should we do as a faculty, student body, administration in light of this seeming genocide or mass killing that our tax dollars are paying for? So they did. They said, well, you all think it's a good thing, and I guess we think it's a good thing. So they canceled the classes on a couple of occasions, and we just had, it was the most exhilarating thing to everybody talk about what should we be doing as people, as humans, in this, what's our role as Americans to stand up to people who are seemed like heroes, but they're making this tragic mistake. And I really think, I might be wrong, but I certainly believe that those who stood up and said, we don't want our brothers and sisters and children to ever go over there and fight and kill these friends of ours. I mean, I noticed in today's, one last thing, I noticed in today's paper, there was a huge commitment made financially in the US to build an enormously expensive consulate, or I mean, embassy in Vietnam. Like, they're our new best friends. Why? Because they're a hedge against China. So maybe for the wrong reasons, but they're, they make the Nike shoes, and Vietnam is this engine of economic power right now. And I'm glad we're friends. I wish it was also because we're truly friends as people. But I mean, I think it's a great thing that we're coming together and tourists can go there and so on, and that they won the war. I mean, I know it sounds unpatriotic maybe to say it like that, but I'm glad those people won their land back for themselves. So anyway, so 4 years at Amherst, it wasn't much to do with studies all the time. A lot of it really was this other political involvement.
all right. It's funny, we're in college at the same time, and my take on the Vietnam War was we were fighting it while I was opposed to it. One of the many reasons, humanitarian, it's their country. We won our independence from England.
Right.
And I also knew there's no way we're going to win a war where you got to fly 8,000 miles.
Right.
The English couldn't beat us because they had to come in boats from England. We're not going to beat them because you can't. So I always thought it was an unwinnable war, and no matter how it comes out, it's I thought that. And then not that many years ago, somebody opened up McNamara, Secretary of Defense McNamara's, had a little secret hiding place where he kept some papers he wrote, and one of the papers he wrote says we can't win. So I looked at myself. I'm not a great social scientist. I'm not a great anything, but it was my assessment that we can't win, and it was his assessment too. And the other thing I knew, just like 3 or 4 weeks after the two atomic bombs in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I knew that we were going to be there building them back up, which is, of course, which is what happened. So anyway, what did you do after Amherst, after college? Did you stuff with hostels and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, most people, back in the 50s would go straight to graduate school, but I just felt I needed to get out in the world and be active in some way, but I wasn't sure how. So I called up my heroes. I have a bunch of heroes, but two of my heroes, Calvin, were the founders of American Youth Hostels. And I said, I am sort of at my loose ends, Monroe and Isabel Smith. What do you suggest? And they lived in Western North Carolina in the mountains, and they were retired, and he had prostate cancer and she had osteoporosis. And they said, you could come and help us, cook for us and take care of our farm. So I hitchhiked down there and helped, fix food and helped out. And it was wonderful to meet them. They were people of the same ilk. They had a vision of people going for small amounts of money and staying in youth hostels that we're familiar with today. But then they got more debilitated, and they said, we need to move to Mexico because our son and daughter-in-law live there, and they can do the nurse. She's a nurse. We can do the nursing care as we pass away. So I said, okay, that's fine. And they said, but would you drive us? And I said, I need to think about that. Oh, okay, I've thought about it. Yeah, I'm all in. So we drove to Nogales, Arizona, and then to Nogales, Mexico, and down to this little tiny town where the son was creating an observatory. That was his thing. And so I thought, okay, I guess I don't have anything to do now because the nurse is taking over. And then the local basketball player said, you do have something to do. Play basketball because you're tall. And so you can maybe score a point or two from time to time. And I wasn't that good at basketball, but I was tall. So I played on their local basketball team, and they taught me Spanish. And as they taught me Spanish and how to be on their team, and we traveled around northern Mexico playing games, they said, why don't you teach us English? Because we go across the border and work in Southern California picking vegetables, and we would like to communicate with our boss and count how many bushels we pick and get paid properly, and we don't really understand the system. And I said, I can't think of anything I'd rather do, but I wasn't sure I was any good at it. But it turned out it was a gift I have. I don't know where I got it from, but I have it to teach and to be funny and to involve students and do stuff that's connected directly to what they want to be, their aspirations, and it dovetailed with whom they want to be. So it was a big hit, and they said, we'll pay for everything for you to stay here. So I stayed and started my first classes and realized I'm a teacher. I have a calling after all, and I'm good at something. And that was the beginning of what became a career as a teacher, punctuated with a few stints as a writer.
Okay. You said writer, and the stuff I read about you, what fascinated me, you did a stint writing for the ecumenical movement for justice and peace in the Philippines, which means you had to write stuff about Ferdinand Marcos, which you did. And along the way, you who you are today is as you worded, you're a conduit to tell other people's stories. So you had some adventures also as that kind of a journalist writer, correct?
Yeah, I think that, Calvin, the second thing I learned, I think in the Philippines when I was doing that in human rights investigation work, you show up means more than you would ever imagine. That the fact that I was out there in the countryside interviewing militia carrying guns to go kill people, and I said, "Hey, what's up? So nice to meet you." And but my real what I was doing, we were trying to find out in the countryside what was happening with these extrajudicial killings. So the Ecumenical Movement for Justice and Peace, which I work for as a writer, their job was to investigate massacres. So it sounds grisly and depressing, but it wasn't depressing because the survivors and witnesses wanted to talk, but nobody would make the effort to go to these remote places and talk to them. But we did.
Right.
And it was like the arrival of the second coming or something. And I remember in Pagadian, which is in Mindanao, I wrote this book called The Iceberg and the Cross. The iceberg is the human rights abuses. We only see the tip, but they're much more than that. And the cross, this is a bishop's way of talking about it. The cross is people suffer the way Christ did in his words. But so I used his words to make the title of this book. But the point of the book was to show what we discovered. And what we discovered was that through a lot of interviews with people was that a number of just local guys were corralled into carrying guns and killing the local priest and the local Protestant minister and the local committee, like a city councilman. And we interviewed all those who saw it and eventually met the killer, one of the two killers. I still remember his name, Sabino Colipano. He was shot. His cousin was there with him to do the murders, but the cousins, as one of them fell, one of the killed murdered people fell, hit his rifle, and he ended up shooting himself in the leg. So he was in a hospital. So we interviewed him, and he said, "Yeah, I did do that. Yeah, I guess because he thought nobody would ever, prosecute him successfully because that's the way it was." But the people who we interviewed were thrilled that this was put in a book. And we, at the end, had a list of every other human rights abuse in this part of the country, in the island of Mindanao. Like there are like 200. We listed all the others, so we could have investigated, but we didn't have time. And so, but here's what really surprised me, Calvin. This knocked my socks off. Knocked my socks off, I guess you could say. The bishop said, "We're going to consecrate this book." And I thought, yeah, right. That's ridiculous. He said, "No, I'm serious." So they had an enormous mass and invited all the people in the communities around there. And they put this book up on some kind of, altar and blessed it. But it wasn't me. I mean, I was the principal author of it, but it wasn't me. It was blessing the truth. I think that their stories were no longer invisible. They were permanently, typed up. And these names will never be forgotten. And I think after that, I thought, I have another calling than teaching, which is to document those whose stories are beautiful and poignant and powerful and find out who they are. It's kind of maybe a little like your show. I mean, I wanted to find out who these people are and tell their stories. Their stories are hilarious and ridiculous and moving, and they're filled with all the stories, those kind of things all of us have, but they're not known, like the one about the civil rights worker.
Yeah, Yazoo.
And I think that the humans want to be recognized for what they do that's right, that's thoughtful, and they kind of feel deeply touched if somebody says, I care that you did that. So when I was kidnapped by the New People's Army, which is the Revolutionary Army, the armed wing of the National Democratic Front, the NDF, when they kidnapped us, I thought as an opportunity. I mean, I actually wasn't scared because I
Well, I was
thought,
just going to ask you, you were kidnapped and you weren't scared.
well, they had these enormous guns and RPG, it was like heavily armed, but they're welcoming us in a way like, as in not to torture us. I mean, it was sort of a mixed feeling. But then the leader, was this ex-priest, said, actually, we're not going to hurt you. We want this country and the world to know what internal refugees are, and that we are living here because we've been displaced by Marcos's thugs and paramilitary, and we're fearful in our towns to live there. And you tell our story, and we'll let you go. So I thought, oh, I can do that. I mean, it was muddy and sort of horrific conditions, but the people all wanted to talk and show me shrapnel and things that had blown up there, and
Wow.
tell. So I did, and ended up writing two short books that got a lot of coverage. And it was maybe with the one time in my life that things had an immediate impact. So because we photographed these militia people who I ran into, obviously not when we were kidnapped, but when we were around the countryside outside of that, when we saw these militias, I would say, hey, oh, that's cool. You have these guns. I was acting pretty naive and stupid, but I said, would you let me? And they said, would you like to hold my gun? I said, yeah, thank you. So I hold it. And I said, can I take a picture of your gun? So I would photograph the serial number of every gun I saw in the countryside. And
Wow.
they're all US guns, like M1s. And I took these photographs back to the Philippine Senate, and there was a senator named Senator Tanyada, Wigberto Tanyada, and I said, I'm an American, but I'm working with the EMJP people, the group I mentioned earlier, and we've been out in the areas where nobody goes. He said, I know nobody goes, nobody in his right mind would go out there. None of us senators would ever go out there. I said, well, we did go out there and we didn't get killed. So, but here's my pictures. And I said, these are the guns that these extrajudicial killings are made with. And he said, oh my God, they're all US guns. And I said, yeah. He said, well, where do they come from? I said, all I can figure, Senator Tanyada, is they come from the two US bases, Subic and Clark, naval base and air base. And those are the source. And so we talked to some other people. They said, yeah, guns are a dime a dozen, they're sold, and then they're used in these extrajudicial ways. So the next year, the Senate voted to end the Bases Treaty, 1992. And it was the first time the Philippines was truly independent of Spain and the United States. Because the US, after basically agreeing to let the Spanish flee, and then they took over, it became their colony, our colony. And then they put these stiff repressive regulations, and they killed a lot of Filipinos and essentially ran it like a colony, but with a nominal amount of self-governance. But the Senate was stronger and more confident, and they said, this shows that these bases are detract from our country's autonomy. Let's end the treaty. And the US was like furious. But anyway, it ended. And it's only now, here it is, 2023, there's some talk of returning to, some kind of bases there. But I think the Philippines is far more, aware of its sovereignty, and so is the United States. Anyway, yeah, so I guess that's my story, that about writing can be a
Yeah.
powerful tool. And I think being present and telling stories, I know it's not really that complicated. I mean, I think listening to people and representing what they say is something that people who've been to like over huge amount of education like me, we owe it to use it. That's how I feel. And I try to do that.
Yeah. And you sure have. I call myself a journalist, but I'm listening to you. I put huge parenthesis around that term because would I have loved to do the stuff? Yeah, yeah, because that's that's real life journalism. But everybody has the purpose. I have my purpose, and anyway, um, uh, I'm curious how you wound up in the Galapagos. When and how and how did Alan Hesse come into your life? Was it after a lot of this had taken place?
Yeah, I had taught many years in high school history and stuff, but I really feel like I guess if you've been in a job a long time, you wonder like, what's the rest of the world like, and so on. And so I knew that I didn't want to wait too long to do things elsewhere. So I found a job teaching in a school in Quito, the Academia Cotopaxi, like a private school. But after a year, I thought uh, these are kind of wealthy, upper class Ecuadorians. I'd like to be on the ground level. So I was wondering where would that be? And so then I read some stuff about that the Galapagos took on volunteers and low paid assistants to help out with their work to help keep the environment intact, and also just research what is the nature of the um, flora and fauna of those islands, right? And they wanted a writer, so I thought, well, that's convenient because that's something I can do. And so I went there and immediately met this quirky, hilarious British fellow, Alan, who you're referring to, and we got along famously. And I think we were just struck by this dilemma of how do you meet people's needs but not destroy the environment that you're in. It's very challenging. My book, I was supposed to write this book. I guess I'm not even sure it was ever published, but I wrote this sort of a script for a book that was posing problems to teenagers in the local high schools. Right now, there are like 40,000 people who live there, so there are a lot of children. And I wanted the children, high schoolers, to ponder, what do we do with our waste with you're 600 miles away from the continent and you're on an island? What kind of waste do we produce, and why should we use plastic bottles, or should we? What about the syringes? Where do we put them?
Mm.
I mean, there's no easy way to on a volcanic island like that to get rid of anything. And also, the families always want more services for their kids, medical, educational services. So there's this natural desire to expand the human colonies. There are three little tiny villages,
It's
but they're not
conflicted with
tiny.
it conflicts with the conservation aspect.
Totally, total loggerheads. I mean, it's like a Rubik's cube is a riddle. It's a Zen koan. How on earth? Because there's no logical solution. So I think maybe I thought what I would do is at least pose the dilemma, and then they can figure it out, because it's not for the outsiders to tell them what to do. The problem with the Darwin Foundation, Alan and I discovered, was that they do know what to do in some ways because they're smart scientists. However, they're not Ecuadorians for the most part. And the Ecuadorians don't want to be, it's like, it's like there's something you see everywhere. People don't want to be told what to do. They want to figure it out for themselves. And you can go there as a friend. This is my solution. I'll just tell you me personally. If you listen really well to people and you sort of repeat back to them what you think they're saying, and you enter their culture with humility, then they do ask you things like, how can we do this? But if you go in kicking ass and telling them you know everything, they will reject you. And I'm very impressed with the need. I think Martin Luther King used to say, if I'm a really good follower, they'll ask me to be their leader. I mean, if you really listen to somebody, no matter how much you detest their political point of view, if you listen, eventually they're going to say, well, what do you think? And so I kind of pulled back from the Darwin Foundation a little bit and got to know local people, because I speak Spanish, which a lot of the scientists don't, and made some good friends there. And it was like, I've realized, although the Darwin Station has this, reputation, really the people of those islands are smart, hardworking, and they want to be listened to. That they are people who service the boats, sell the t-shirts, clean the ballast. I mean, that's what they do for work. And they're also just funny people. They're musicians and mothers. And when I think that my best time there wasn't with the Darwin Foundation, it was with people telling me their stories. And then I think it helped validate their lives, because the tourists and the Darwin Foundation tend to frown on humans. Don't even like, if you look at any literature about the Galapagos, it won't show pictures of local people. It shows tortoises, birds, blue-footed boobies, frigate birds. It does not show the people who have stores and outhouses or whatever. They live there, and they're going to determine the future of the Galapagos. So we might as well get to know them and be their friends and honor them. So that's sort of what I tried to do.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So Alan's a genius at that because he's funny. I try to be funny sometimes too. And it was a seed planted for him and his work cartooning. And for me, it was a seed. I mean, I don't know much about science or climate change, but in a way, I got a taste of it there. So, yeah.
Okay. Alan and I met, I don't know, a year and a half. LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I love networking. I spend inordinate amounts of time on LinkedIn. Obsessive compulsive disorder. And one day there he was, and it was instant chemistry. He's climate, I'm climate. He's climate to this wonderful, perfect level of reaching children and getting them to take the right steps, Captain Polo. And we just clicked, and it's been this great partnership, working with a little group. We listen, we all have a ton of stuff to do. We all have a ton of stuff to do. We don't have a lot of time. And anyway, enough with that. So oh, by the way, I want to go off topic. I didn't even tell you it was. It's a one-word answer, if you'll indulge me. Actually, you're like a perfect candidate for this question. It's one of my favorite questions to ask. And you don't have to answer it. You can. You could be a couple of answers, but here goes, Tito. Excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
Good question. I would pick I have two possibilities,
Sure.
so I'll pick one. I would pick Father Damien in Kalopapa and Molokai and Hawaii. First of all, I like Hawaii. Secondly, he was an outsider like me, a Belgian in his case. He went there and he listened to people, and they said, you know what? We're smart. We've been condemned to be lepers. We've been called lepers, like as in we're unattractive. But actually, we're politicians and we're medical people and we're musicians. And he said, I got it. Let's make a community. I'll help out. So they built churches and houses and healthcare system. And it was like he listened well and he participated, and eventually got Hansen's disease, which is the term we now use for leprosy. He died, but he lived as a brother to people unlike himself, and they took him in as one of them. And that's what I want. I feel people have been generous. Like when I went to Ukrainian border recently, I went there not knowing squat, like how to do anything, because I didn't speak Polish. I don't speak Polish or Ukrainian, but it's sort of like some junior pint-sized version of Father Damien. I was there listening, and I was able to be helpful, lifting bags, telling people how to get food, serving coffee. I don't know. I just feel like I heard about him when I was living with Monroe and Isabel, and we would read a story about an inspiring person every night. So Father Damien was the first. And I thought, I was only like 22, but at the time I thought someday. So I've been there twice to Kalapapa, and I burst out crying every time I go there, because this is a story of people who reviled, feared. And yet when you're there, you realize they're as sweet and precious and interesting as anybody anywhere. They're still some there people,
Wow.
because it's those, once they found a treatment that was put it in remission permanently, the sulfa drugs that they now use, they were told you can stay here forever or come back to mainstream society. And they said, many said, we like the fact we created a village here. We actually love each other. We actually function as a town.
Wow.
And so there are only a few left because it's, been many years, but the last ones were put there like at the start of World War II. Anyway, they're still there and they have tours. And when I got remarried, I said to my wife, she said, "Oh, what do we do for in Hawaii? It'll be fun." I said, "How about going to the leper colony?" And she said, "What?" And I said, "It's the most wonderful story. It's really touching." And I told her a little bit. She said, "I'm all in." So thank God I married her. So we hiked down to the Kalapapa, which is called, and had a wonderful tour. Anyway, so yeah, Father Damien, I would like to meet him.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. And here's a good segue question. If you can encapsulate this, what we touched on this in the beginning, moral commitment and stuff, but what guides you? What moves you along in all that you do?
That's a great question. I think that I'm going to do something I don't like to do and say what I think we as humans have as an opportunity. I mean, maybe it's not fair to say that because what do I know about every human? I do think if we listen for hints and clues and are courageous and follow those that seem right and giving and loving and thrilling, then we take an enormous risk to follow those. And then people will be critical and kick our ass. But you will meet, once you go off the edge a little bit, once you're on the edge or you go off the deep end a little bit, you find new friends. So I sort of feel like my friends in the past, I have a string of close friends, but I've sort of had to find new friends because as I seek in Reynosa more recently or Ukraine to follow what I feel like I'm led to do in this short life, I get in really lonely situations and I feel like, what the hell am I doing here? I'm led here, but I don't even know if anybody, I don't know what to do. But when, for example, in this Ukrainian Polish train station, I arrived there and somebody stepped up, could see that I was confused and said, "My name is Andrew. Let's go to supper. Let me tell you all about what's happening." I mean, as people, I think when we risk doing the right thing, others notice and they say, "I'll carry part of your weight. I'll carry your suitcase, or I'll give you dinner." It's the most wonderful kind of Zen thing where you do the least helpful thing for yourself in a way, at least it feels like it, but you're following a sign. And then something happens, some chemistry occurs, and somebody steps up and says, "We welcome you here." When I was in Reynosa, that was an awful place in some ways. The cartels everywhere. I could never walk on the streets. I had to be picked up at the border by somebody, taken through Reynosa to avoid being killed. It was very dangerous.
Oof.
Everybody said. So so anyway, so I go to the clinic and I'm like, "Oh shit," maybe I should watch my front and back. And they were like, "Oh, hey, nice to meet you." So I know a little bit of Haitian Creole. So I would talk with the Haitians in Creole, terrible Creole. And they thought it was hilarious. And I thought, oh my God, why do I worry about that cartel? I'm going to have a big laugh here with these guys and joking around in Creole and eating food with them. And I realized even if I was shot, you do take risks when you go to places like that. You go take care of somebody with COVID or HIV, you're aware that if you step up, you might get cut down, right? But I'm aware that every time I've stepped out of my comfortable place, people have embraced me if I'm just quiet. I mean, it's the weirdest thing. If I'm don't interfere, and I honor where people are at and listen, I find a new home temporarily. And I think people feel like their home is blessed in a certain way that I showed up. Certainly in Poland, at the end, I thought, I've done nothing. I've contributed nothing here except offer people coffee. And this guy got on his knees and said, he burst out crying. He said, "You came all the way from America. Nobody else. How many Americans are here?" I said, "Nobody." And they said, "You came all the way here and you're working with us. That's wonderful." And he burst out crying. And I thought, just because I showed up, well, that's, if you have a grandmother and you show up and she's at the end of her life, or a sick child and you show up, it's a miracle that happens. But you could be showing up in another country too, or show up, I don't know, showing up counts. It's not a big deal. It's not complicated. I mean, I have several degrees from various colleges. It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with any of those things. They're more like a burden than a help sometimes. So
That's
I
very
don't know.
profound.
Did
Showing up.
did I respond to what you asked? I'm
Yes,
sorry.
you did. Yes. I just wrote down your last showing up counts, and I understand that because you're demonstrating your genuineness, your caring, you're showing up. Most people don't show up. So that's a powerful thing that you said. Um I marvel at your journey, and I also marvel at the work you're doing with immigration reform and migrants and helping them come to a new life. How do you? That's for you in a country that's split down the middle with uh, with the whole notion of immigration, and it's in the news every day. How do you follow that path? I guess that word comes up, moral commitment. How you follow the path to do the work you're doing.
Well, sometimes being an immigration advocate for those to come in this country seems subversive of those who seem angry about the whole thing. Am I fighting them? I don't think so. I think I prefer to see it this way, that all of us are immigrants from somewhere, either voluntary or involuntary. And all of us have discovered somewhere in our past a grandparent who sacrificed pretty much everything to make it. We know this story. It's not strange to us. And when you think of those who work in our yards, the Latin Americans say, or they're now mayors and not governors yet, but senators, you realize, well, their story is not hurting this country. It's enriching our country. And then you, in your town, say, or like at least town I'm in, you have all these ethnic restaurants, and you realize this has enriched my diet too, my palate and my cuisine. So in a way, even those who are angry about immigration are beneficiaries of immigration, not just in their own families, but also the workers that help out in their neighborhood and stuff. I feel like I would like to call, if I had more time, Kelvin, I would tell the stories of some people who are living here who work mowing lawns and constructing houses. They're all individuals. They're, if it's Rodrigo or Jose, they're not a mass. I mean, I think the hardest thing is that when we think humans aren't human anymore, they're just an anonymous mass of horrible things, like a mass of Vietnamese, a mass of immigrants at the border. I guess I was talking to somebody the other day who's, I don't know, I'm sort of worried about immigration. I said, well, who fixes your house and your yard and everything? Oh, all these Mexicans. I said, what are they like? He said, they're great. They are always punctual, and they're super nice. They play nice music, and they're friendly. I said, well, they're the very same people who are waiting at the border, and we have the lowest unemployment in like 50 years, meaning everywhere there's a help wanted sign. what do you think about having more of these people so that these jobs get filled? Oh, I don't know. I'm against all these people incoming. There's a horde. It's this, deluge. Well, it's not a deluge. We could, if we and this is me speaking, okay, and I'm not asking anybody to agree with me. If we let in every single person waiting at the border, say 100,000, it would not put much of a dent in the help wanted ads. All of them came. That's my feeling is before, say 50 years ago, it was an open border. That's one thing. I mean, in El Paso, people just cross back and forth. But I think a better example might be the EU, where all these countries that had fiercely guarded frontiers, with customs houses and police throughout Europe. I mean, if you've been to Europe back then, you would know that. Now they took them down, and people from the Eastern countries visit the Western countries, and nobody drives at 70 miles an hour across these borders, and nobody's worried about it. And in these countries, some of them are poor. I mean, like Bulgaria, Romania, they have a lot of problems. But they trust these people will act responsibly, that they will try to get jobs. That's what people do. People generally aren't bad. And generally immigrants are the most determined people to make it, not just on their own behalf, but for their children, and whether it be here or remissions going home. So I think my hope is that the light will shine and people will say, wow, they're the greatest resource imaginable, and they're waiting at the border. Let's let in some with work authorizations. How about a lot? Because we have done this in the 50s. We did the Bracero program in Southern California, where there were work permits to work in the fields. We know how to do this. This is not rocket science. You interview people in Reynosa or northern Mexico, and you say, what skills do you have? And you give them a work permit, and you send them to Detroit or wherever they want to go. I think it's the greatest thing around. It's the greatest asset we have here. People want to be here. Yay. That's better than people not wanting to be here.
Correct.
So I don't know. I've seen a lot of people at the border and worked with a lot of people. Not one of them would I be unhappy with as a neighbor. I mean,
Right.
or a worker. So I think it's a treasure. They're a treasure, and they're us. They are our ancestors. They're our grandparents. So I know it sounds heretical to say this in this current debate. My brother's a lawyer. He says, how can you say that? We should let them all in. And I said, well, I don't see any problem saying it. And he said, but that might undercut the Democratic platform. And I said, so what? It's the truth. I mean, the truth, I think it's worth saying the truth. And then you can figure out your own political platform. But the truth is, we are immigrants, or children of immigrants, or grandchildren. And I have no doubt these people somehow will cross. I don't know how. And they will be part of our country, and they will be a positive part. And it will be thrilling to see their new restaurants and them as senators and doctors and so on.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to my grave believing that's true. And it makes me feel good to have that feeling. Does that make sense?
It sure makes a lot of sense. And you've brought in hundreds and hundreds of people. You've helped. You've been the facilitator. You've helped them get done with the paperwork, which is it's a wonderful thing. It's a moral commitment. And I think we, the species, as part of the title of this series of interviews, we, the species, need to do more things like this, because all we got is each other. We're one species, we're not countries, we're a species, and we've got this massive problem on our hands that we need to work together to fix it, and quickly. So we're all.
I mean, I'm glad you have that title, because actually, now that you're talking about it, I of course I see even more there than I realized. But it's true that the love and our ability to articulate these things, and our ability to ask forgiveness for mistakes we make. I mean, there's this vibrant elasticity with us as a species to close gaps. So if this current political gridlock is here now, well, I don't think it's always going to be here. I mean, there is something underneath that ties us together. It might be part of it. We're all immigrants. It might be that we all have children to love. It might be that we enjoy playing and we enjoy nature. I mean, there are things about our species that we all agree on. And I think it possibly binds many times that we're not aware of. It binds us together. I mean, I think sometimes I've thought so gloomy thoughts, not really to kill myself, but just what's the point? You know, it's pointless. It seems like obstacles are enormous. But then I meet a new person and I think it's glorious, you know,
Yeah.
to see their, I mean, the person sings, or I have now I teach classes at the community college. I have a Chinese poet who's written this most wonderful thing about being alone and falling in love. And somebody wrote a poem about a Ukrainian. I have in another class wrote a poem about spam today. The
Spam, the
meat,
stuff you eat, the
the
meat.
meat,
Ah,
eating spam. It was a hilarious poem. But you know, people don't follow some format or equation or formula. I mean, they're quirky and funny and loving. This Ukrainian I have in my class is a loving woman with panic attacks because it's hard right now for her. But she's a lovely person. I hope she stays in this country with her parents. But I don't know. I just feel like there's a secret out there about our species. Well, maybe many secrets, but one of the secrets is that there are a lot of loving, thoughtful, fired up people around, and their stories are incredibly inspiring. And I'm glad when they're told. I've told a few of them, but I'm glad when others are doing that job too. And I don't know. So that's sort of, I guess, my calling,
okay.
Calvin. And it seems to continue that way.
A little bit my calling too is to take the energy and the stories and the people and the journeys.
Yeah.
And because my tagline is, everybody I interview is CNN and ABC and CBS are too busy. So I'm not. So
Right.
I can do the platform thing. Um,
No, I just, sorry for interrupting. It is exactly what you do. I mean, it is, yes, absolutely.
yeah,
I just want to make sure to say that. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. And that's what I envisioned from day one. The whole title, We the Species. I'm so wrapped up climatologically. Uh, um, I'm so wrapped up, and I do absolutely no politics and no religion in my work, because I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror. Sometimes I shave and I say, it was like a cereal commercial for Life cereal. Uh, uh, Mikey likes it, and I look in the mirror and I'm shaving and I realize that basically people like me because there's nothing to dislike by design.
All right.
I don't touch the things that rip us apart. There are very important things for me to touch, so I touch them. And it's people's journeys. It's your journey. It's all positivity, because we have to come together. It's funny. I envisioned something that would speed up the process of all of us recognizing and realizing we really are one species. It's a flying saucer is coming down to land on the White House lawn, like that movie with Michael Rennie. Oh shoot, what was that movie? The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Mm.
And he's an alien, and he comes down and he tries to tell us to fix up our. But I always envision if an alien spaceship came down and we would have to repel or fight or do something. Every one of us on a planet, every one of us, Republicans and Democrats and Russians, and we're all one species. We have a mission. The Space Invader, like that game in the 80s. But anyway, my last question. to you, lightening things up a little bit, is what do you do? What do you do to keep sane?
That's a good question. I'd say most of the credit would have to go to my wife, who puts up with me. After I got married to her, her name is Kim, my siblings said, "How do you put up with him?" And she said, "I don't find it so difficult." And they said, "He's so prickly and, driven sometimes." And she said, "I've never noticed any of that prickly stuff." And so then they asked me, they said, "How come you're not prickly anymore?" And I said, "I don't know. I guess the edges got sawed off or something by her." And they said, "Well, what did she used to do?" I said, "Well, she took care of wild horses and trained them." And they said, "Well, maybe that has something to do with why you have been tamed." And and of course that was a joke, but she, I think it helps that she likes me being myself. And if it means doing something by myself, like maybe she doesn't want to go to Tibet, for example, which is something that I'm attracted to because she can't stand the high altitude. Her heart can't take it. But she says, "Go for it." She says, "You'll be a better person and a happier husband." So, and when I did these New Mexico, I didn't even talk about working with Afghans in New Mexico and in El Paso and Reynosa and Ukraine, all those I did by myself without her. But in each case, she said, you're a happier man around me because you do those things. So I'm happy that that's the way we are together. So that helps. And then the other thing is, Calvin, is I feel like my physical self is a little separate from maybe my head. My head gets too serious and committed, and all the stuff we talked about. But my physical self is more playful. So I uh, I still race, do sports. Like I'm going this weekend to Dallas and some national championship for swimming and biking. And even though I'm not so young anymore, I like to push myself to see what my body can do. Of course, my goal really isn't just that; it's to be limber and be around kids and be able to do stuff like outdoors. But I mean, I love being outdoors and swimming. And you mentioned that earlier. I've done a lot of open water swimming, and it's not because I want to accomplish anything. I think I feel at home in the sea on some level. I mean, I get into the waves. I don't in Galapagos. I mean, sorry, in the Gibraltar swim to Morocco, it was really rough. But I thought I'm at home on the sea, on the surf, like I'm bouncing
Wow.
up and down, and it
Wow.
didn't seem threatening. Never seemed scary. So let me give you two things. Sorry, I'm talking so too verbose here. Excuse me.
No, it's good.
My wife putting up with me, and I think being in the natural world uh, makes me feel like I'm a speck amongst many specks, and that's good to be part of a speck in the bigger universe. I have a place as a speck. We're just here for such a short time. And we're
Correct.
so tiny in this big thing, but we're part of this big thing as whatever we are. And I like that. So that I guess that's how one last thing, if you don't mind.
Of
I
course.
continue to teach even though I've retired from public school teaching, but I like the international students I work with. I feel like they enrich my life and they're very funny and they tease me and they tell me what to do and they criticize me. That's great. So they're a source of joy and for me. Yeah, that's a really good question, actually.
Great question and a great interview. Um, we've we've done part of it. We've done part of your journey. There's more to. We'll come back and do some more. I'm thanking you, Tito, for your graciousness, your time, your moral commitment, because that means so much to me as I search the universe, and I do. I'm so grateful for Alan and for you, and spending this time together. I'm officially welcome you to come back. I mentioned this before he went on air. You go down to the Galapagos and you're hanging out with Alan. Let's do a Zoom and kind of BS.